Thank you, everybody, so much for coming in this evening. First order of business, if you could just please turn off phones for the next hour, we would very much appreciate it. And thank you all for coming in this evening to see Peter Salter's lecture titled The Walmer Road, a title taken from the location of his current and first ever UK project underway now here in London. It's an architectural project, and I think many people in the room will already know it to some degree. It's an architectural project of absolutely extraordinary imagination and beauty, with a remarkable design strategy embedded in a structure that will be read through its materials, its details, its presence on a site, and in that way is an absolute embodiment of ideas that Peter both imagined and cultivated and promoted, not just for many people in this room, but for this school for many, many years as an incredibly important and influential teacher here at the AA. And before saying more about Peter, just to briefly say it's a project that was commissioned by Crispin Kelly and the Baylight Properties Company here in London, a company that Crispin set up after graduating from the AA. Crispin is a former past president of the AA and has for 25 or more years run a company that is an absolute model in our time of architecture and the quality and impact of architecture in the building of our world. And this is simply the latest of many projects that Baylight has carried that agenda forward with, and it's a company that includes the Baylight Foundation, which many people will know here has been incredibly supportive to a huge number of students over many years here in the school and made their studies, in fact, at the AA possible. So it's a delightful occasion, I think, to bring together people whose experience have in the past and continue to impact us in many ways. As I said, Peter is a longtime tutor at the school that many of you know. In the intermediate school as a unit master, in the diploma school as a unit master, and indeed as a technical studies tutor who worked with and alongside many units and agendas in the school, and which explains to a very great degree the basis for his influence and impact on the culture of this place for many, many years. And I think it's an impact that's still being felt in many ways. More than anything, what Peter's agendas sought in the units that he led was an examination of what he wrote over and over again as forms of the inhabited landscape, which not just the UK but that Europe provides in incredibly unique forms, in which for each year in a unit became the focus of a project, usually 2 projects a year, which Peter and his students would work on in incredible detail. The unwritten agenda of the unit, for those of you that don't know it but experienced it, was of course always how to push architecture forward through particularly forms of drawing and modeling which are simply at the highest standard imaginable in architecture of our time. Peter's units pushed, let's say, the legacy and the agendas of architectural and its drafting and drawing history forward in incredibly interesting and compelling ways. And in fact, I think that you will see be a huge part of his current work and examination within this project. The role and the presence of drawing and the way in which drawings and models can represent the material reality of architecture is something being worked on in this project tonight, but something that Peter, in thousands of conversations with students and teachers here at this school, pushed for many years. Peter is indeed a lifelong teacher. In 2004, he was celebrated with the Annie Spinks Prize for Excellence in Architectural Education, which he received that year, and in 2012 has been awarded an honorary fellowship in the RIBA, and he's currently Professor of Architecture at the Welsh School of Architecture in Cardiff. In the 1980s, Peter and his collaborators, who included Chris Mcdonald, Jeannie Sillett, and others, created an iconic set of projects that many of us first learned about the AA through. They were published and widely disseminated. In the early 1990s, built his first works in Japan, the Osaka Folly Pavilion and other projects which people in this room contributed to. And he's back here this week, I noticed, on TS Week at the AA, which is the week in which everybody starts to get technical in their language and expression. But the point I'd make is I think Peter, probably more than anyone, embodied the idea that a technical consideration of architecture is always and should be embedded in the projects of a studio and unit. In fact, technical considerations aren't something to put off on the side in a department or a laboratory or wherever other schools put those kind of teachings, but to do the opposite, to embed that in the thinking within a project and a unit. And what you're seeing tonight in his own personal work is in fact an extension of a way of thinking and learning architecture that Peter remains a remarkable leader and example of. Please join me in welcoming Peter Salter.
Thank you very much. Well, that's an introduction. Thank you very much, Brett. I'd like to thank the AA for inviting me to be here. It's very good to be here. This seems more like a reunion than a lecture. I mean, I see lots of faces, and it's really wonderful to see you, and thank you very much for all coming. I suppose I'm going to primarily talk about Walmer Road. And Walmer Road has been with me since 2006, when I came back to teach briefly. And I and the client would meet in the unit space, and we would try and resolve how to make a set of houses that in a kind of high density way or in close proximity. And it's been going on since 2006, and I feel like I'm a Baylite scholar in a way, because as Baylite has offered so many students in this place an opportunity to be here, which is an amazing and wonderful thing. He's also, Baylite has also given me an opportunity to build a building in this country and to do it differently. I mean, the two projects, I mean, the one on the left is Kamichi Pavilion, which it was done under the Japan Expo Toyama in 1994 and was one of the last pieces that were done through executive architects in Japan. So you were literally, the whole kind of idea of strategy and detail, you handed it over to the local architect, and the local architect made of it as he did. And in this job with Peter Beard, it turned out a wonderful project. On the other hand, Walmer Road, which has taken a long time to come, is a different kettle of fish, because all of the strategies and the details are kind of re-examined. We're looking now, because we're working with the executive architects who are Mole architects, with Hugo Keane and Meredith and Alex. And it's a different scene, really, because you don't just hand over your project. What is wonderful, although Crispin probably doesn't want to hear this, but what is wonderful about it is it gives you a chance to re-examine the technical aspects of the project, to try and find a poetic in relation to that. And that has been hugely valuable. So every little detail, you're looking for a kind of poetic or set of rules for it to operate against. So it's a very different kind of mindset between the Japanese projects and this project. Having said that, I'm going to show there are some common ideas that exist between the two projects. And I'm going to show Kamichi because it talks about qualities of light, and it talks about the idea of movement in relation to light and view. These are the original drawings. They were made in Philadelphia in a room. And they were sent to London, and then they went from London to Japan. So there's this kind of toing and froing of handing over ideas and and strategies, and tried to put detail to it, but you couldn't really deal with it in that way. Kamichi is a mountain pavilion. It exists 2,500 meters above sea level in a national park. It's now called Peter's House, which is rather nice, and it's only open from about May to September, because after that it's closed down because of the snow, and it literally gets snow up to about this height. So you're dealing with extraordinary conditions. Incidentally, the snow is probably 10 or 12 meters high, really thick snow, and the building's 13 meters tall, so it just sort of pokes out the top. And when you first see it, you've been driving up in the national park for about 20 minutes, and you first see it set against these kind of rock and wooded hillsides, and then you drive off following the mountain road, and the next time you see it like that. And so this idea of sort of viewing it and then moving to it, and then viewing it and moving to it again, we start to see in the building. And these are some drawings about moving around the space. It has a room at the top which allows you to look at the mountain peaks of Mount Tateyama. This is the building. You can just about see it. This was taken in May, I think. It's right next door to this amazing meltwater river. And the idea of it was to make it two shells like a shell of a boat. So it has uniformly distributed loads across the shell. And so it acts like a boat. I mean, it's in snow, but it's in water. And inside the shells is another landscape of construction. And that piece of string measured the distance from the building to the mountaintop. This was built by a local architect who actually was brought up in the national park. And this is his interpretation of my drawings. So you come to the site and you go off again and you find a path to Peter's house, and you end up on a deck which is on the south side, where a bench enables you to sit and take your climbing boots off and to air your toes. And you follow a water gutter into the building. Oops. Sorry, got those back to front. That's the building when it's open in the summer. And in the winter, the townspeople come and they take out the crisp packets and they shut down the building for winter. This is the tank which collects the water which is received from the gutter that you follow into the space of the building. This is the space, the back of the room and the back of the shell, so you're literally walking in the space in between the two pieces of architecture. And so this idea of walking around things in order to gain length, because it's quite a small building, we start to see in Walmer Road. So we're looking at the fronts and the backs of spaces. This was supposed to be clay rendered, but they didn't do the clay rendering for some reason. Oops. And you would go upstairs And it's really quite dark. And that kind of sense of darkness and calmness, of kind of absorbency of the dark, is one of the aspects of Walmer Road that I'm interested in. Some of the construction, the black carbonized steel, carries the dark, perhaps in a similar way to this wood building. And this is looking out from the mountain peak. There's a bee's nest there, and there are roosting places for birds. And there's a little furry animal that keeps its tracks going in the snow over winter, and it goes in there in the winter. It's quite nice. So it becomes something other than architecture. It becomes a kind of refuge, not only for weekend mountaineers, but for animals. Okay. So the only thing I wanted to say about that is the idea of viewing, the idea of a kind of darkness, the idea of a preambulation. And that's what I bring to Walmer Road. This is Fenella. This is the state. This is almost the state of the construction at the moment. The Walmer Road project consists of 4 houses. There's what I call an underground house, which is underground because it has to be pushed down, because the planners wanted to be able to look through that tree across and see the ridge line of this little cottage, which is a 2-story late Victorian cottage. And so that's one house. And then there's this house we call house 1, house 2, house 3, and the depressed one is house 4. The thing about these houses is that it's in a kind of, it's quite a tight site for putting 4 houses, and so the idea is to try and build re-entrance into the houses in order to get more sunshine in. So there you get these snorkels and various things which allow the south sunshine, which is coming from here, into the building. So as you come off Walmer Road, you come into this courtyard, and you're heading for one of the houses, and it's single aspect. House 2 and house 3 are single aspect. And so you walk into the house, and you walk into the darkness of the house to the party wall, and then you go upstairs, and you're walking back out towards the light again, where the light is in the courtyard. And in this house, it's double aspect. So it's a different kind of house. It has a different kind of sets of geometries. And this house, house 4, is like it's a bridge between a yard and a yard, and it's literally totally lit from above. This drawing was a very early drawing, and it's a nice drawing, but it's completely deceiving. I mean, I caught a cold on doing these kind of drawings, really, because in the end I thought I would never do any more of these drawings, but I'm still doing them because I like doing them. But they're really bad news, because they bamboozle you in thinking that you've got a particular kind of space. Actually, this space across here on the project is only 5 meters. And so that's between house 3 and house 1. So, and that courtyard, therefore, is the only set of privacy between the houses. courtyard, to get to the courtyard, you go up a ramp and into this outdoor room. This outdoor room is lined with louvers, timber louvers, which enable you to give you privacy between houses, to reflect light into the building, and they act as a kind of baffle to sound, because behind the timber louvers is an acoustic render. And that acoustic render works with the floor. What you can't see here is that the floor is actually made of end-grain wood block. So when you walk on this floor, it's very quiet, yeah, and any sound then gets absorbed, let's hope, in the acoustic render behind the timber louvers. So the room is like, I mean, these funny things, which are lights, remind me of, and the concrete bench seats, place to put your shopping when you come in, to open the door. It's like San Rocco. I always think of it like San Rocco, the Scuola San Rocco in Venice, which is an entirely timber-panelled room with bench seats around the edge. And that's what it's supposed to be like. It's got a timber floor, it's got timber walls, and it's got these lights which are quite low, so that you don't get hopefully any light pollution to the space above and to the houses. So there's an idea here about quietness, and this idea of quietness works in relation to a kind of calmness of dark space, and in relation to a kind of privacy. So the idea of privacy and quietness and a kind of sympathetic softness of light is what we're interested in. Yeah. So this drawing is a bit out of focus, I think, but was a compilation. This just shows you how you move up a ramp, step ramp, into the wood block floored courtyard, and then you proceed into the houses. This is a section, original section, which shows the two yurt structures on top. The yurt structures are interesting because it gives a change of architecture. It gives a change of, so it's like going across the leads on a country house, where you walk across the roof leads, and at the top of the top on the roof, you will get these little dining spaces or these little rooms in which to watch the moon or whatever you did up there. And I thought that would be a really nice thing to have in an urban environment. And that's interesting because there are regulation about planning regs which says we weren't allowed to go higher than the surrounding building. And so the architecture has to be manipulated to accommodate this total floor height, this total height. And so most of the bedrooms, which are quite squashed in their floor-to-ceiling height, give the room back to the top floor where the main reception rooms are, and to the ground floor, which is more like maybe a home office or something like that. So these two rooms are the more public spaces, and the private spaces in the middle. So if you you're walking up to the top of these buildings, and then the architecture vocabulary changes, and maybe there's a greater sense of release about that. This is my planning permission drawing, and this is Mould's drawing. And I think it's quite interesting. I mean, this was done in 2006, and this was done in, 2010, maybe. here you can see house 4. This is the basement area. This is house 1, house 2. And you can't see much of house 3 because it occurs mostly above ground. But the garage, this is a garage which the estate agent said you had to get a Chelsea tractor down, which is a big Land Rover. So there's a Land Rover you have to have enough ramp distance and height in order to get a big Land Rover down it. And so, now I always liken this to a 747 landing. I don't know why. And so the ramp has got cut marks in it, like you have on an aeroplane runway. And it's got little blue landing lights. And you land literally on a turntable. And the turntable points you in the right direction to where where you can park your car. And what is quite interesting is that house 4 begins at that level. In fact, there is quite substantial accommodation for house 4 there, but you have to go from your car into a little courtyard which is open to the sky, and then into your house and up the stairs to the living room, which is on the upper floor. You notice that these 2 rooms are new. These are now media rooms, which go even deeper than the car park level. So we're going down maybe 4 or 5 meters into the ground. And this is the ground level. This is the main level in which everything, from which you access your property. God, I hope that's not mine. This is the bedroom level. This is the level where things are slightly squashed, where the ceiling heights are low. And you can see that this is the level that's got quite a lot of these kind of re-entrant pieces in order to make private space, which is sunlit, for you. And then we come to the top floor, which has got the yurts on it. And you can see that we're still playing with the position of the yurts there. And meanwhile, these guys are pumping away. The bedrooms are the things that I'm really interested in. And the bedrooms have an in situ concrete wall that faces onto the courtyard. So you can think about the courtyard as this wooden room, and it has its skin, and it backs on to a concrete-faced room. Concrete-faced room, if you live in the Barbican, the idea of living in a concrete place is fantastic because you have no airborne sound. It stays within the room, so you can hear yourself snoring. And so the idea of doing in situ concrete like that works with that idea of providing sound and quietness. The room itself is like a kind of patchwork of different finishes. So there's in situ concrete, and I'll talk to you about that later on. There's clay boards, and of different colours, just as in this. This is from Katsura. And there's even perhaps bits of gold leaf, although we haven't discussed that recently. So there's a window there's a window to look out of when you're sleeping. There's a window, a big timber window, which on the right-hand side there has a shutter on. And that shutter, if you open that up, you're confronted by a slab or slabs of tufa. And it reminds me of being in Japan in the Hilltop Hotel, where the owner of the Hilltop Hotel was somewhat eccentric, and he said that everyone who stayed in his hotel had to have good, clean air. And so he put this kind of really weird piece of invention which cleaned the air for you. It was before, this was built in 1920s, it was before air conditioning. And so hopefully this piece of tufa will allow and clean the air coming in so that we don't get all those soots of London coming in. And the timber window, you can see, has shutters on the outside, and they can be turned and manipulated to receive the light. And then, because there's a box there, which is a kind of sitting box which you can read by, and that has a window, clear window, not covered by shutters, and which was asked for by the client. At the top, there is a long window right at the top, right at the junction with the slab, and this is trying to catch some of the light. That's also clear of louvers. That's trying to catch some of the light and bounce it across the ceiling. So this is Mcdonald's bedroom, and I think the softness of the light in that room is just completely exquisite. And you can just see bits of light very high up on the ceiling there. And I'm hoping in my drawing, anyway, that that's what it's going to be like. Okay. This detail is of the black steel. This is the black steel we'll talk about in a minute, but the black steel are basically all of the bathroom objects that sit in the space, which modify your movement and absorb the light. And it's sitting next door to a clock. And when you look at Hogarth's paintings, you see in some of his marriage a la mode and things like that, you start to get gold and brass work, particularly with clocks, door handles, things like that, that reflect candlelight. And I really like the idea of that. And so there's the clock with the little gold top to it, and the light fitting with the gold leaf or brass behind, just reflecting slightly in the space. So it's like, hopefully it will start to be like an 18th century interior. Whether it will, I don't know, but this is what we're going to try and get at. This is one of the black steel panels. This is a prototype. Don't look at the hinges, because the hinges are terrible. And they're very thin. They're only as thin as the door. So if it's a 44 millimeter door, it's only 44 millimeter thick. But if it has to become stable, it either has to bend or it has to get thicker. And it gets thicker to contain services, and it has underfloor heating in the walls, so that you get this carbonized steel on the outside, which is this amazing black colour, and it would be warm. And the screen doesn't go up to the ceiling. It has this Georgian wired cast glass skylight all the way around it. So you can imagine that when you come out of the stairs, that you see this black carbon steel object which you have to move around. But you can hopefully just see a little glimpse of light from the rooms adjacent to the courtyard. That's the detail I did. And this is one of the early bathroom details, which were trying to examine the thinness of the screen. And literally all of the rooms, well, virtually all of the rooms, have this datum at around 2200, which is for the light to pass across the geometries of the objects. This is the other. That's the prototype. You can see it's kind of agricultural. I quite like it. You know, it's tack welded, and you try. Jamie Faubert told me about this. I mean, Jamie Faubert has been fantastic. We keep going around to see Jamie Faubert because he's the expert on black steel, and so you try not to do anything to this. This will be finished in with beeswax on the outside, and you're trying to keep these kind of blue-black pieces. This is the reason why this is so silvery. Hugo told me is because we're using the wrong grade of steel here. I mean, we're using only 3mm steel, and we should be using 4mm. If we use 4mm steel, we get a different color of carbonized steel. And I sit there on the train. I sit there on the station at Cardiff Station, waiting to go home, and I see these black steel rolls of black steel coming out of Port Talbot past me on the train, and I always think of this, thinking, God, they're lovely and dark. Why isn't mine darker? Okay, now the prickly subject of the concrete. This is the drawing that I made for this wall, and because the light's coming from here, this wall will be darker. And so what we've tried to do is to vary the formwork. I mean, this piece there and this piece here are grained wood, yeah, and we're actually using a birch face ply. And at the top there, because this is all one slide, where the formwork ties are, is phenolic face formwork, and which means phenolic face formwork. I mean, I'm not an expert in this. There are many more people who know about it than I do. But phenolic, because it's so smooth, it reflects light differently. Whereas the birch face plywood, because it has a raised grain, casts shadows. Yeah? So it has the effect of making the wall darker. And so most of this is birch face ply up to this line. And then above that we go into phenolic. And on the ceiling, the soffit, we are experimenting with a form liner to try and get it as smooth as possible, so there are no joints on the ceiling. So here it will be lighter, and the ceiling will be lighter to reflect the light, and here it will be darker. And you can see, if you look at the composition of Ando's concrete, he uses an additive, and he changes his percentages between the wall and the ceiling because of this thing of trying to gain light. Now this wonderful thing over here is what I would like my wall to be like. This is Ando's concrete for Naoshima, which is this gallery hotel place in the center of Japan. And I think now that it's a photograph taken when the shutters were first coming down, and so it's still quite wet and damp. But what is so beautiful about it is that it has these cold joints. You see this line going across it. And so instead of being this kind of dead industrial surface, it has a kind of geological quality to it. And when we cast the wall last week, there was one very beautiful cold joint like that. Unfortunately, it's quite high up in the wall, but it is very beautiful. So the contractor, Darren, we're now going to try and bring the cold joints down. So there are other drawings where you can see there are lines going across here, which are my version of cold joints. The other thing is the tie plugs. I mean, the tie plugs, the normal ones used in Britain, are like 45 millimeters. And I thought that was too big for a domestic situation. So we've now had some new tie plugs made, which are 32 millimeters. So they're much smaller. But even the Japanese ones are even smaller still. They're down to about 22, something like that, which are timber and they're unscrewed. This is all Naoshima. Darren knows this. You've got the book, like I have. And this is we're trying to reproduce this reflection on the ceiling. Whether we will, I don't know. But what we're trying to do is not to have any joints in it, because there was a discussion about the soffit of the slab, whether you see all of the timber joint lines, and whether they should be big or small. If they're big, then it's less fussy, which is quite nice for a small room, but then it changes the scale. So then so there's this whole kind of desperate conversation about whether the joint should be big or small. You can tell I'm getting a bit nerdish about it. And so in the end, we decided that we'd have no joints. No joints, no bloody smoke detectors, no lights, nothing on the ceiling. Yeah? And so that all you get is the light on the ceiling. And so we're doing that, hopefully, with some form of formwork liner, so that we won't get things like this, although these are quite beautiful. We won't get joints like that or like that, but we will hopefully get the light. You're not finished with concrete yet. The other conversation about the concrete was we want to use an additive, because if you keep using Portland cement, it's very bad for the environment. So although we want to have the concrete because it has good thermal mass, we don't want to use so much cement. So the idea was to replace it in part either with a PFA, pulverized fly ash, or a GGBS. And this is PFA and this is GGBS. And they both are at a mixture of 20%, I think it was. So it's quite low amounts. in PFA you can use it up to 40%. In GGBS you can use much more, like 60%. But so we spent weeks trying to decide this, Fenella and I and Hugo. And then Darren came along and said, well, we don't have a batching plant that can do PFA. So that made the decision. You know, we're into GGBS. So then there's a whole problem then about, well, how much GGBS? So you look up the Ando book again, not convinced by that. And I spoke to Gerard from Grafton Architects, who uses GGBS, used it in Ireland. And he originally specified 50% GGBS because he wanted virtually white concrete. 60%, I think he used. And, but it was coming into winter time, and if you use GGBS, the curing time is much slower. So he took his down to 30% GGBS. And he said it was pretty wonderful. So we're using 35% GGBS, and that's the decision. Yeah, so we spent quite a lot of time on these kinds of drawings, trying to achieve this kind of thing. You know, what happens if you put black sand in it? Can't afford black sand. You know, how do you get cold joints? Very difficult to achieve. This is the concrete drum for the staircases. And on the inside, it's finished in birch face plywood. So the inside, it gets its light from the top, hopefully will have shadow. And that will work with the black steel staircase. On the outside, it will be phenolic, so it will be very smooth and hopefully more reflective. So hopefully it will just pick up the last light as it comes from the outside section of the house. We're using these very beautiful glass prisms in the concrete work. So hopefully in this kind of shadowy concrete, we'll get these kind of areas of light. They're deck lights from a yacht. We're using these with that, and that's another story. That's later on. So all of the time, there is, unlike Japan, where you sort of ship the drawings, you have a meeting, you try and discuss the detail in relation to the strategy. All the time here, we're re-examining every move made in the house to try and find some kind of poetic understanding of it. Including the floors. This is Carlo Scarpa in Venice. I think it's a kind of courtroom building. And what's so beautiful about it is that there's this amazing floor, which I think in his case is travertine marble. In our case, it will be concrete. And then onto the floor, you put on these timber rugs. And so all of the rooms, go into the room on the concrete, and then you step up onto the timber rug, and it's like you've arrived. And so the floor, which is, I haven't really talked about structure, but most of the structure of the building is made of very quite thick floor slabs, so that the loads can travel wherever they like, because nothing lines up except the staircases. So what you're doing is you're distributing the load paths through the floors, and they're finding their way down. Now, I hate screeds. Liz will know I hate screeds because we had lots of arguments about it. But anyway, so now the floor has got some recesses in it in which we are seeding the floors. We're putting additional brown rather than any white, brown and dark gravels into the seeding. And this was a diagram because then what happens is that you sandblast it and then you grind it down so that you start to get these kind of fossil-like pieces in the concrete. And they will go through all the circulation areas and in the bathrooms. And then as soon as you enter a room, because the building's quite cellular, they're like a series of little cottages, warm cottages that you step up onto the timber rug and you know you've arrived. More concrete. This is the drawing. I really love this. This is Carlo Scarpa, of course. His board finished concrete. And you can see, I always thought that it was just, it had been either sandblasted or it had some kind of retardant put into the formwork so that it starts to lose some of its board marking. Yeah, and I really like that. I've only now found out that it's boucharded, it's been hit with a hammer to get that. So it's knocked off quite a lot of the board marking. The only thing I didn't like about it is that it's very big boards, and most board marking you see they're quite big boards. So we're using much thinner boards because it's a domestic scale building. And this is a drawing which attempts to tell you the amount of boarding and the differences in the boarding and the depth, because it's also got, I really like these pieces here which are sort of indented. So we're trying to get that indentation. And at that point I was also trying to sandblast it. Just it's the same angle as Carlo Scarpa. But I don't think we're going to sandblast it now. We might have to do something else instead, which is yet to be determined according to samples, really. So this is a drawing, really, about looking at the board marking for the front elevation. This is the ground floor of the front elevation. The client set up a concrete room in South London to test whether we have PFA or GGBS. This is an advertisement for PFA, Cemex. This is this guy. And we didn't really like this. We go on site and we haven't built and don't know how to build. And so you go on site and you say, wow, this is great. And you realize that you shouldn't say that, because, and it's only when you go to bed at night and you start sleeping you think, I don't like that. And I don't actually like this. And that was the only bit that I quite liked. It's very bad concrete, as Hugo will tell you. And but the amount of modulation is much more subtle and much more beautiful. And what's so nice about this slide is that the formwork is actually redwood formwork, which is what we're using, which has been wire brushed. So it's really bringing the grain out. So hopefully when you walk along the side of Walmer Road, you start to see the grain and you start to see the kind of slight modulations on that. Okay. Oops, sorry. I've just got one more thing to say about that. what is nice about this piece is that on the top of the board lines, you can see it's whiter. And that's where the light, this is not what I saw, this is what Peter Beardsall saw. You get, I talked to everyone, and he said, look at the light on that. And you get amazing light reflections off the top surface of the board marking. And you get shadows on the bottom of the board, individual board marks. And so we thought maybe that at the top of that wall on Walmer Road, that we could have more light reflections, more white lines. And then as you go down through eye level at the bottom, you get more shadow. And so hopefully that's what we're doing. And it conforms, all the way. That starts to conform with the ideas of the building, of the softness and the reception of light, and the receiving of light. Now we're on to these pieces, these yurts as they're called yurts because they have kind of soft, angular, curved moulding. And originally this is a model made at 1:25, which we nearly suffocated on because I was sanding it for days on end in the office, and everyone was completely sick of it. And this is, I tried to get a rhino model. In fact, we succeeded in get a rhino model of it. So it was 3D scanned, and a rhino model was made of it. But the rhino model was so complicated, we didn't know how to use it. So in the end, it's just used for presentations. You'll see it. So in the end, we've gone back to making these models. And I made the model and then measured it and to make the drawing. These are two of the yurts. That's my planning drawings with two of the yurts. And this is a model, actually not of a yurt, but by a student from UEL a long time ago who did this cold moulding that I was interested in, I am interested in, which is, it uses very thin layers of timber which are counter glued and pinned together. And they use it for racing dinghies and because it's very light and it's much better than carbon fiber. And you can see these red circles here are going to have these glass prisms in. And so there would be glass prisms like a kind of shoal of fish. And then in amongst that, we're going to have these round stone lights, which are like fish eggs. We call them fish eggs. So you get so on the ceiling, you get these kind of shoals of different qualities of light, artificial light and natural light. And it sits, the inside of it is built looks just like that. This is the sample board, so I won't go to that for a moment. There's the rhino, the dreaded rhino model. Looks nice. These are drawings that I did just really. These are more accurate perspectives. I don't really do perspectives. I don't, because I find them hard to do. But these ones were trying to be much more precise about levels and quality and sort of feelings of the space. And the kitchens tried to have tabletops which are at normal table heights. And then onto that, just like a kind of, so like this Chinese bureau, this is the normal height, and then the working height is above you. And so onto these normal tables are placed these little trays, these big trays, they're like the kind of pieces that you get in a temple, where they put vases of chrysanthemums or whatever it is on them. And these would become the cooking units and the sink units, so that you're not, because I hate kitchens where you have to sort of wobble on a stool because the bench height is somewhere up here. And so the whole of the kitchens have these more civilized, in my idea, table units. So this is the shutter, and it's used to regulate how light bounces in, and it's used to give you privacy so you're not looking into your neighbours. And that's a detail, and this is a construction detail about how you fix the louvers. The crucial part of the louver is not on this drawing, but that's how it's fixed. And all I want to say about that is that it's part of the system of privacy and quietness from outside. I mean, what I didn't explain is that about the bedrooms is that this idea of coming out of the staircase lozenge and having to move around components which are sitting in the space, and those are the black steel components. So they're these light-absorbing pieces that you move around. And I was thinking, these are not kind of family houses, you know, you don't have children running around. But they are for people who want to live a more discreet life, you know, let's say. You know, so this act of having to move around things, pieces that shelter the room by this movement, offer that sense of privacy. And you find that in relation to the... So the gutters are like Enrique Morales. Morales was fantastic with gutters. And I thought, when you look out your window and you look at the gap between the louvers, you start to see the sky, and I didn't kind of like that. So I thought you'd have a nice big gutter, nice big copper gutter, to stop you looking up. And so the copper gutter and its downpipes just run across the surface, and sometimes they run across the windows as well. So you'll see a bit of copper going down, which will work in relation to these bathroom pods, where because of the glass, you also get cast iron drainage pipes running through. So you'll see odd bits of pipe. Some are copper, some are cast iron. And anyway, that's that. This is the snorkel that's trying to relieve the corner. Corner's very difficult to deal with. And so what we're doing is to making a in situ concrete snorkel. It's shaped on my arm. So it looks like that, at the top and at the bottom. And we'll talk about the colour of it in a minute. So now, this is the last slide. And I just want to talk about the colour because Fenella and Anthony Malinowski, who are doing the colour clusters here, worked on the colours of the courtyards, which are behind, in some places behind shutters. And this was a model made by students, which was then painted by Anthony and Fenella. And what is weird about this drawing is because I flattened it all out, but actually when you start to put it all back together again, you start to get very odd sets of relationships between the different colours. And quite a lot of them are metallic colours. So you're going to get light reflections off the metallic colouring from one side of a property reflecting on another property, because some of them are quite close, particularly by the entrance to Walmer Road. the houses come very, very close together. So the kind of light quality or light bounce between the houses is what we're interested in. And the light snorkel, I think, is that one up there. And it's, as I understand it, it's blue, Korean blue color, temple colors. Yeah? And the grey is the acoustic render. And that will have the timber shutters over the top. So where it's more colourful, it's where there are no shutters, and where the shutters are, it's much more simple and plain, and keeps the natural colour of the acoustic render. The outside, I think, might be a little violent colour-wise. And so what we might have to do is to start to think about maybe using a crushed brick dust or something like that rather than a pigment, so that it's not so it's more settled. And this is the place where that amazing board marked concrete will be. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good. Peter, thank you so much. Fantastic lecture. Let's take a few questions, and let me start. You know, it's hard not to think of the project in relation to years of work that you've been doing here and in other projects building up to it, a series of themes and topics that are running through. What stands out, it seems especially, isn't just that it's being realized, a project is being realized at this scale, but the amount of time you've had to work through its ideas. And I'm wondering, just on that topic alone, on time, and we're 5 years into the project, more or less?
Something.
Say something about that aspect of the project and what it's offered you that maybe other projects in the past have.
Well,
Has it given you new topics, new ways to revisit familiar?
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, that's what I was trying to say with the Japanese projects, is that you did your drawings, your design drawings, you presented it to the town hall, to the mayor through an interpreter. You did some details, and that was it. You know, so literally I don't know, I spent a year, maybe not even a year, and then the job was built, and you accept its wonderfulness and you accept its not so wonderfulness. But in this job, it's not really a job. It's like a kind of research. It's a conversation. And it's a chance to re-examine every technical aspect of it. The client's looking at me, Steele. All the kind of technical aspects of it, to find something other than, that the wall has to be 200 millimeters thick. You're trying to find qualities out of technical readings of it, and you're trying to set those technical readings against the strategies that you set out for yourself. I mean, it's a complete and wonderful luxury that architects really don't have. And it's not luxury. It's fantastic for me. I mean, it's become part of my being because it's been with me so long. And I don't know what's going to happen when it's finished, because I don't know what I do. Go and play train sets or something. I don't know. But I really appreciate having the time to do this, and Crispin knows that I'm slow-brained, unlike him, but we make it. It's very good. I feel incredibly lucky about that. That's why I said it was like being a Baylite scholar, because that's what it's like, You're a Baylite scholar because you're given the opportunity and the time to do it, which is brilliant.
Questions? Yeah.
you go.
Peter, it's lovely to see it getting to this stage. You didn't show us anything about house number 4, which is a very different proposition than the others, and it's about the carving out of space. You said it was entirely top lit.
Yeah.
That seems to me a very different challenge, but it also seems to be an echo of how you've dealt with the whole site, which is like sort of carving out the site. How far have you got with House 4, and do you see that as a sort of testing of this, very different from the other houses, testing of this carving and burying of space? So it seems to be a completely different language.
I'm always hung up on the bedrooms for some reason. But because the site's so tight, we can't do all the concrete together, as I understand it. I'm looking at Darren. That what we're going to do is work from the farthermost house out. So he's going to work his way out of the site. And so house 4 is the first house to be completed, and then house 3, and then house 2, and then house 1, and then we all go to the pub. And it carries the same kind of concrete. It has perhaps more flexibility about it. There's much more like the Barbican flat where you have a sliding door between rooms. So it's not so cellular. So it's perhaps more spatial. But then it doesn't have. It doesn't have. So I mean, it does have windows, but mostly it's the light comes from the top, and the light is coming from roof lights, which are set into Urban or one of these timber cross-laminated construction pieces. And what I didn't say was that on the ceilings of all of the houses, including House 4, is painted a very delicate, I hope it's delicate, pale blue. And that is so that when the light hits it, you won't see the pale blue anymore. You'll see it almost white because the light glances off this very gentle colour. And it's also got more timber panelling. I mean, most of the houses they have in the kitchens have timber panelling. And in some of the houses, in the TV media rooms and all of the media rooms have willow weave in. So because it's a TV room, it doesn't have any light. So you've got to have something. So it smells nice. And there's more flexibility in House 4 than there is in the other houses. But again, we have a construction now where all of the retaining walls in concrete have this concrete lipping, which we're knocking off so that you start to get these kind of striations. But each house has a little bit of board mark concrete to tell you you've arrived, that's the entrance. And each house has a little bit of fluting, because I always remember Dale Benedict, when I was a student here at the AA, talked about Georgian door cases and about the fluting on a Georgian door case, where your fingers fitted exactly the fluting. And so we've got fluting on our doors in concrete, on our door entrances. So there's a piece of board marking and a piece of fluting, which signifies the entrance. And that will happen in House 4 as well. And so House 4 is suspended between these two bits of quite fine board marking. And the board marking has zebra grass in the basement. And it's lit with sodium lights. So you get this green zebra grass with yellow light into it. And then you get the red streaks for where the Chelsea tractors go, and the blue landing lights. Okay, so it's more theatrical.
Questions? Over here.
John.
I'm humbled. And,
Humbled, you shouldn't be.
if I could press you, if you're not exhausted, the investment and interest in the interior and the occupation, whether it's with the eye or the body, is extraordinary. I wonder, having left this slide up, fortunately or otherwise, as the last one, whether you'd like to talk about the relationship between how the interest in the interior affects the concerns of the outside.
Well, I always thought that every time you walked home of an evening and you went to your front door, that you would see, oh, somebody's in, because the shutters would be open differently. And when the shutters are open, you get a different you'd get a different colour behind it. That was all. And so when you looked out of your bedroom window, you could maybe see patches of reflective colour. I was quite astonished when these guys did this. I mean, because I thought I hadn't expected it to be so vibrant, in a way. And I think it's great. I don't know what it's going to be like in relation to the interiors. And maybe I need to do some drawings of that when we get closer to the time. But it's also, I mean, it is quite nice because we have to, because of the insulation coil, we have to meet 0.2 U values. And that's made up with wood-burning stoves in some of the rooms. So the U values are actually down at 0.3. And so we've got to get it built quickly before the U values change. And the reason is because the acoustic render has to be fixed to the insulation, which is on the outside of the building. So it's a really strange building because you always expect your concrete on the outside and all of your all of your other stuff on the inside. Whereas it's reversed here because of the hierarchy that you give to the courtyard as a room. And so the concrete is on the inside in this instance, with the clay boarding as well, which is this kind of tan. I mean, I've been sort of making out about concrete colours and all the rest of it, but actually most of the walls are patched. They're patched with maybe bits of white, certainly with pieces of clay boarding, which is a tan colour. It always reminds me of a limousine cow. I always think that's the colour, is a limousine cow, which is this tanny brown colour. And so inside it was going to be quite bright. The bathrooms on the ground floor, the bathrooms are a kind of Georgian green. So on the outside of those black, on the bathrooms, which is this black carbonized steel, on the inside it's painted like you would paint a kind of tractor part, sprayed many times. And on the ground floor it's this olive green, Georgian green. And then on the middle floor, which is the bedroom floor, it's painted with this amazing red that Anthony and Phenolic have come up with, which is a really beautiful and vibrant red. So it has a warmth to it, and when you put your bum to it, it will be warm because it has underfloor heating in the walls. And it has kind of little funny things that where what we call tic-tacs, these sort of rounded corners, 60s shutters, doors and little doors and things that open and close, more like the Sharrow house. And so you'll open one of these and maybe you'll get another colour inside. And then on the top floor, we go to this amazing duck blue, darker duck blue, which is also a Georgian colour. So we're, because we don't know anything else about colour, so we go back to where we like the colour, and that's where we take it from. It's pretty eclectic, really. So it's not very strategic.
Questions? Peter, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Thank
lecture.
you very much. Thank you.